When is a central bank not a central bank? When is a private bank public and a public bank private? Sound mysterious and full of secrets? Well, that's the Vatican Bank. A new book called God's Bankers reveals the history and operations of the Catholic Church's own bank. Here's the author, Gerald Posner.
This is an institution of men who believe that they represent Christ on earth, that the one true religion. And for nearly 2,000 years, 1,800 of those years, they didn't like the idea of capitalism. They were Pope kings. They had the papal states, 15,000 square miles of Italy, so they levied taxes that paid for this enormous royal court and lavish court. Once they lost their empire, their earthly empire, and became this little postage stamp piece of land, the Vatican City, they said, how do we get money? So they got it from donations to the Pope, Peter's pence. They sold indulgences, pieces of paper that told the faithful, you're forgiven for your sins if you contribute. But that didn't raise enough money. They were still looking for ways to raise money. And what finally did it is in 1929, they hit a deal with Mussolini, the head of the fascist state. He recognized them as a real country, that little piece of land, and in return gave them about $1 billion in a day's money, compensating them for the loss of the papal states. They said, what do we do with $1 billion? We're clerics, not financiers. They hired a guy who was a brilliant financial whiz, Bernardino Nogaro. He came in, he understood arbitrage, he understood offshore banking, he understood how to move hard assets around, investments in real estate, and he started to do that. In the middle of World War II, he said to the Pope, I need a bank. It's not enough to have correspondent banks. We need to move our money off the radar so the British and Americans can't follow what we're doing, because they were playing both sides. The Americans and Brits they were investing in, and the Germans and Italians. They didn't know who would win. They wanted to make sure they were covered. And that's the birth of the Vatican Bank. They go from an institution that can't embrace capitalism to one that suddenly has its own bank in the middle of the war. In its charter, in which it was founded in 1942, there's one shareholder. It's the Pope. There's no directive that it should turn a profit. It does turn a profit, we believe often, but it's hard to tell. There's a rule that every 10 years it will destroy its files. Most banks don't do that. They were doing that until 2002. In addition, everything that's run is in the dark. There's no transparency at all. It's sort of secret. So in essence, they've created, they, meaning the Vatican, had created an offshore bank in the center of the Vatican, in the center of Rome. And for Italians who had money, this was very enticing, because here's Vatican City, and there's Rome right around it. There's no wall between the two. And it meant that if you were standing in Rome and you had $1 million in cash and you didn't want Italian authorities to know about it, or you were mobsters and didn't want prosecutors chasing it, you just had to find a priest who was a friend or the family to deposit it into a Vatican bank account. And the minute it went in there, it disappeared and nobody could find it. That meant it was tough for me as a researcher. So I asked for access to the Vatican bank files, and they sort of smiled and said no. I asked for access to the secret archives where the Holocaust-era files are still buried, and they gave a much nicer, longer process before they said no. They ignored requests for interviews. So pretty much they kept me at a distance, no cooperation. I wasn't surprised. I was somewhat disappointed, but it forced me then to go out to the archives of different countries, from Romania to Russia to England to the U.S., and sort of piece the story together from those old files.
The Holocaust and Nazi Germany and communism.
In 1933, the Vatican does a concordat, a deal with Nazi Germany, to acknowledge the Third Reich, to sign a deal with the Third Reich, a treaty. And that was a big thing for Hitler. He loved that, and in return, he had them sign, meaning the priests and the bishops had to sign a loyalty oath to the Third Reich. The Vatican collected a tax for years. 8 to 10% of Catholics in Germany of their payroll went to the church. Hitler agreed to collect it at the source, as sort of straight as a payroll tax, from the equivalent of taking it off the payroll and give it to the church. It meant a big increase. It put the Vatican in Nazi Germany like this. You also had a pope at that time who had taken over in the 30s, who had been the papal nuncio to Germany for the best years of his life. His top aides were all Germans. He loved things German. When the war broke out, it worked to Germany's benefit, because the Vatican Bank, once it existed, with a pope who had known and liked things Germany, Pope Pius XII, when the initial reports came in about the civilian slaughter, and they came into the Catholic Church and the Vatican before they came into the Allies, and the reason I say that with such a firm conclusion is the Vatican had something that the Allies didn't have. they had priests in all of the little parishes in Poland, which was ground zero for the killing fields, in Croatia, in Romania, in Hungary. Those priests reported what they saw on the ground back to their bishops, and those bishops sent them in cable to the Secretary of State's office in Vatican City, and the Secretary of State's office met every day with Pius XII. They had those early reports from 1940 and on about the Eitzen group and the mass killing squads, the mobile killing squads. They stayed remarkably silent during the war, and one of the things that's raised, I talk about it in this book, is people have posited theories over the time. Why wasn't the Pope more active? Why didn't he step in? Why didn't he use his moral authority to say to Catholics who were committing the atrocities, who were basically Catholics in the Nazi Party, some Lutherans as well, this is a mortal sin to kill Jews. People said it's anti-Semitism. He was afraid that Hitler would move against him or against Catholics. I also think that one of the considerations was money. There were profits being made by the Vatican Bank and others with the Germans, and until late in the war, they did not want to upset that.
Italian economist and banker Ettore Gotti Tedeschi was president of the Vatican's bank at a time of turmoil. Amid a money laundering inquiry, the Holy See's opaque finances came under unprecedented scrutiny. Tedeschi was sacked for alleged dereliction of duty. He claimed he was trying to introduce transparency. So what does he make of the Vatican and the world of high finance today? Euronews met him in Milan. Mr. Tedeschi, you were the president of the Institute for Works of Religion, the Vatican's bank, during the papacy of Benedict XVI. You asked for the help of leading experts on money laundering to bring the Vatican back onto the transparency whitelist. Why did the Vatican not accept your plan?
Many people didn't understand what had happened after the 11th of September 2001 and didn't understand that the new international regulations which determine banking systems were going to become stricter. Secondly, numerous people in the Vatican were afraid of a loss of sovereignty in agreeing to yield to these new international norms. Thirdly, in terms of culture, many people believe that the controls are not legitimate because at the Vatican there are facts, events to defend. And so people confuse, on the one hand, secrets with confidentiality on the other hand. They didn't understand that in the context in which we were living, the absence of internal controls would have provoked more external controls. Fourth point, there were people who didn't understand that the danger concerning this anti-money laundering legislation would lead to a loss of credibility for the Holy Father. The problem at the heart of this debate is that they tried to deter me and pursued me, giving 9 totally false reasons. I demanded an immediate inquiry on these 9 points, and there never was one. And no one ever asked me about it. And what hurts most, and what remains even in the Church, is that they didn't want to understand the truth, nor to know my truth.
But when you were dramatically sacked, you were afraid for your safety, and you also compiled a dossier on the Vatican bank's secrets.
No, the facts went in a completely different way. However, all that is a question which was passed on to the public prosecutor. I prefer not to speak about it.
Moneyval, the Council of Europe's Committee of Experts tasked with counteracting money laundering, has always identified numerous shortcomings in the Vatican's finances, in particular in the field of laundering. In your opinion, is Pope Francis able to sort things out?
Moneyval carried out 2 important inspections at the time of my mandate as president of the bank. The first in November 2011, when it came to see what we'd done the previous year, and it gave a very positive opinion. Then in December 2011, a month later, the Vatican's law on the matter changed against all expectations. 4 points of law were modified, and in particular the role of the controlling authority. The WWII scandal broke at that moment, and one bank, JP Morgan, closed its account at the Vatican with an enormous media impact. Moneyval came back to Italy once again, and in April 2012 it wrote a second report in which it said, "You've taken a step backwards," but a month later I was no longer there.
A quel punto però il mese dopo io non c'ero già più.
Do you think in the Vatican Bank money is still being embezzled?
I don't know everything, but if there's no law, if the procedures are not there, and if there's no controlling authority, it's obvious that there's a risk.
In any case, could Pope Francis resolve things?
If Pope Francis wants to really take measures and not only make declarations about reform in a similar way to Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, he should find out about what happened.
Anche Hollywood, col film The Big Short.
Even Hollywood denounces the criminal cynicism of the world of high finance in the US. I'm thinking of the high-risk mortgage loans, toxic products. But in your opinion, is it enough that a banker is motivated by good intentions to neutralize the harmful consequences of these actions?
Le conseguenze letali delle sue azioni?
In this precise case, the limit of cynicism comes not from the banking world, but from the world of politicians, who, in struggling against the crisis, falling GDP and hoping to reduce debt without doing a proper debt reduction process, triggered the famous animal instinct of bankers who were eager to be able to act freely. The responsibility is personal, Mr. Valenti. There was no collective responsibility. Each person should know whether what he does is good or not good for himself and for the common good.
Ma com'è accettabile che un
But how can we accept that a banker can receive bonuses for toxic financial products and not be pursued by the justice system?
finire davanti alla giustizia?
If you want a technical explanation, it's simple. From a moral point of view, my opinion is there should never be a bonus like that, and if a banker has had them, he should give them back.
Le decisioni economiche
Economic decisions are taken by informed people between New York and Washington. In Brussels, they send their conclusions with a note where they write "to do." That's what you wrote in the book you published with the journalist Paolo Gambi, The Devil's Job.
Ha pubblicato recentemente con il giornalista Paolo Gambi.
Now, I want to ask, on the international level, do you think Europe counts for
A
nothing?
livello internazionale non conti nulla.
I believe that today we should ask ourselves this question, but what is it that counts? Today, no one knows where the power lies. Europe could have a very big advantage, that of being a point of balance. It could support the strategy of the United States, which is very worried because Asia is experiencing dramatic growth, or Europe could well make its own choices. Europe is a key element at the moment, in my view, in this system where geopolitical power is being reorganized. But what is Europe? I've not understood what Europe is and who Europe is. If Europe is the Europe of Brussels, we're off to a bad start. But if Europe is Germany, then we're off to an even worse start.
Time is out of joint, scrive Shakespeare.
The time is out of joint. Shakespeare wrote that in Hamlet. These few words seem to me to be revealing about what happens in the world in numerous domains, and no doubt have been for centuries. But do you really believe religion and morality can resolve things?
There's no religion that imposes a cultural system. We can't impose anything. We must believe individually and in a responsible manner regarding what's good and what's bad in exercising our personal freedom. And it's for that reason that the Church has a very, very important role, which has been failing for most of the last 30 years. This failure has led to a great part of the international political and economic world, international leaders, to no longer have this feeling for life. And if I no longer have this feeling for life, how can I give a meaning to my actions?
Dottor Gotti Tedeschi, io la ringrazio di essere stato con noi su Euronews.
Grazie a voi, è stato un grande onore e piacere.
Will go on for 6 months. We'll focus more on Exuma. There's also a period during the pilot where we will be in Abaco, starting sometime in February. And again, it's building out the experience, getting the system more integrated with the rest of the banking and financial system. And after that point, by the middle of 2020, we expect to be in the position where we can begin to expand to the rest of the Bahamas.
A step in the right direction is what the Bahamas Christian Council President Bishop Delton Fernando had to say about the recent launch of the central bank's digital currency sand dollar in Exuma. Fernando telling ZNS News that with the second and third economies still reeling from the impact of Hurricane Dorian that left a price tag of more than $3 billion in damage, the focus now is on being more creative.
Got to now think on platforms that we did not usually think in. I see the sand dollar has moved into phase. Obviously, it's not cryptocurrency, but I believe it's a test. It wasn't said, but I believe it's a test of how embracing we are as a society to the digital dollar. I believe just as we could put as much energy as we can in some of the delinquent areas, let's put it in the creative areas. That's very creative. And if we can get that kind of thinking and that kind of mindset in our country, not only the cryptocurrency, the security that goes behind it, the offshore banking can go in another area that has not yet been touched. These are areas I believe that the country and financial planners must engage. It's not easy. I wouldn't be behind this mic saying, but if we engage God and allow Him to guide us in our deliberation, I believe He'll give us the ability to solve our problems.
Welcome to the Crypto Teacher, and guys, I come back with that second video just to make you think. Now, you know I've done plenty of videos on banks and how banks control your livelihood, the money laundering, the drug dealing, and of course, when it comes to cryptocurrencies, that's what they say it's used for, but we know that the banks are what? The biggest launderers and the biggest drug dealers. If you read my book, I've already went over, the Vatican and how basically religion is basically a disguise mechanism, a controlling mechanism, guys. So we must understand that and find truth. Of course, the difference between spirituality, understanding the Most High, but then also understanding how religion can be used to control an individual also. In my book, I go over that all wars were created by the banks. So all wars are bank wars. So, of course, we want to thank those who serve in the military, but we also want to seek truth. And if you look at cryptos, without a shadow of a doubt, would have been the greatest invention to man. Like I said, if someone's hurting overseas and I can just send money straight to them, I don't even know them, that's the greatest mechanism you possibly have. But if I have cryptos only controlled by a few hands, like the current system that we have right now, and you constantly hear them banking the unbanked because you have so many people that are off the grid and they don't have to rely on the current system that we're in now. So let's say if I owe a bill, and let's say if I don't have the money to pay for it, as far as the way I'm looking at it, they can just take it right out of my crypto account. They can block transactions. We already see that China can do that now. In my video earlier, I went over that the Bahamas is going to be using digital currencies, of course, through their central bank. Now, at the end of that video, you clearly see the bishop pushing cryptocurrencies. So guys, like I said, basically we must wake up. Now that's all I have for you, and you have a wonderful day.